In today's edition of Can They Make the Playoffs? The Penn State Nittany Lions. And, dang it. Jesus. This guy can't even put on a pair of sunglasses. They're still not really on. God. I know what I'm doing. What was I saying? In today's edition of Can They Make the Playoffs, the Penn State Nittany Lions. And unlike yesterday's contestant, Notre Dame, who cannot make the playoffs in 2023, boy, they were crying in the comments on that Notre Dame video yesterday, too. Notre Dame can, too, make the playoffs if they go 11-1, woo. No, they can't, and they won't. But they ain't going 11-1 anyway, so either way, I mean, they're not making the playoffs. Just get over it. Jeez. Notre Dame. Where do I have Notre Dame? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11? Is that right? No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I got Notre Dame at 12. I've got Penn State at 4. You know, Georgia 1, Michigan 2, LSU 3, Penn State 4. So obviously I think Penn State can make the playoffs. I've got them ranked ahead of Ohio State, who I've got at 6. Now, these are just post-signing day top 25 from February, so that's not settled on this for a final preseason ranking or anything. I do another one after spring practice and another ranking a few weeks before the season starts, but it does feel like it's poop or get off the pot time for James Franklin and Penn State. 11-2 last year, but their 2 losses were to Ohio State and Michigan, and the Michigan loss in particular was just embarrassing. Not even so much the score, it's just what they give up, 400 and something rushing yards to Michigan. You can't do that. You're not going to win very many games against anybody giving up 400 and something rushing yards. Now, to be fair to Penn State, there's not too many teams that have the ability to run for 400 yards, but Michigan's one of them. But you're not beating Michigan giving up 400 rushing yards, right, Ohio State, man? I mean, it's just not going to happen. And so Penn State didn't do that. Now, the Ohio State game last year, Penn State had opportunities to win that game, and they blew it, particularly in the fourth quarter. Not to take anything away from Ohio State's win. Ohio State deserved to win that game. That's not what I'm saying. But they were at least competitive in that game. Penn State was. Again, the score at the end of that game, not really indicative of how close that game was. I mean, was it a pick six or a fumble return for a touchdown late in that game by the Ohio State defense that made it a 2-score game? Whatever it was, that was at least a competitive game. But I've been on here singing the praises of James Franklin since the minute Penn State hired him. I mean, it looked good in the beginning. I mean, they won the Big Ten. I think they even won a Rose Bowl or something. Of course, they've yet to make the playoffs. But James Franklin has had some disappointing seasons. And the problem for James Franklin, outside of that one season back in whatever it was, 2016, which was the last time they beat Ohio State, by the way, has not beat Ohio State since 2016. They beat Michigan, I think, in 2019. But outside of that, there's been some disappointing seasons at Penn State for James Franklin. And I know my mind is kind of tainted when it comes to James Franklin. I'm a little biased towards James Franklin. Because if I live to be 250 years old, I'll never forget what he did at Vanderbilt. I mean, getting Vanderbilt to the point where they're winning 9 or 10 games, I don't know. I mean, I know everybody knows Vanderbilt's a bad team, but I don't know if people really understand how bad Vanderbilt is and what an accomplishment it is to get them to the point that James Franklin had them. And to his credit, he got out right on time. I say this about a lot of these coaches that are at some of these mid to lower level schools. You have a really good season or two, and you get some offers, you better get out. You better get out while you can at these mid to low level schools if you've got any inclination or desire to compete or win national championships. Because these schools like Minnesota and Northwestern and Purdue, Iowa State, these are all schools who have had 1 or 2 really good years. Their coaches got elevated to like everybody's must-interview list. But they all decided to stay where they're at, and now nobody wants any of them. You can't, nobody wanted Brom. Nobody wants Matt Campbell at Iowa State. Nobody wants Fitzgerald from Northwestern. Nobody wants P.J. Fleck from Minnesota. you have to strike while the iron is hot. To James Franklin's credit, he did that. He got out of Vandy when he could, landed the job at Penn State, which is a premier job. They haven't really reached the levels that they want to, the levels they once were at back in sort of the 80s. But it's a good job, and they've had some good seasons, but it does feel like it's poop or get off the pot time for James Franklin at Penn State this year. It really does. They've got a lot coming back. I really like their 2 running backs, depending on what happens with Blake Corum's ankle. We'll see, if he's able to come back 100%. It was just announced this week that he's not going to be able to participate in spring practice, continuing his rehab from that ankle injury. Michigan's got 2 really good running backs with Corum and Edwards, but Penn State's right up there. Nick Singleton, I could watch that guy run the ball all day long. He's a hell of a player. Drew Allard, quarterback, played some last year. The fans wanted him to play more. They were done. What was the quarterback's name last year? They've had him forever. I'm drawing a blank on it now. But anyway, the guy, he just wasn't the answer. Crapped the bed in almost every single big game he played in over the course of his career. So he's gone now. The Drew Allard era begins at Penn State. The highest rated quarterback Penn State has had since 2013. It's been a long time. Christian Hackenberg. Remember that name? Back in 2013. So the Penn State fans are excited to see what Drew Allard can do. Should have a pretty good running game. I still feel like they kind of need at least one wide receiver to kind of step up and become like a go-to type guy. Somebody that other teams, if they don't have to fear them, they at least have to respect them. I feel like they still are kind of looking for that on the outside. Defensively, I really, really like the linebacker situation there. And honestly, outside of that Michigan game last year, Penn State's defense played pretty well. Even against the run. It now completely let them down against Michigan, no doubt about it. But outside of that, I thought their defense played good enough to win most games last year, including the Ohio State game. They had chances to win that one. So, I like what they've got. They've got to get better along the lines of scrimmage. Now, they do have that Fashanu or whatever, I think he's an offensive tackle. Offensive lineman, I know. All-American, probable first-round pick in the NFL draft. But the offensive line as a whole has got to play a little bit better, and the defensive line as a whole has got to play a little bit better. And it's going to come down to the quarterback play of Drew Allard. Now, he played some last year, but not a lot, so there's going to be some bumps in the road, some learning curve type situations for him at quarterback. When you look in the Big Ten, specifically the Big Ten East, which is where Penn State plays, and you've got Michigan and Ohio State sitting there, and I know Ohio State lost C.J. Stroud, and we'll see who they replace him with at quarterback. But ask yourself, when was the last time Ohio State had a quarterback that didn't put up ridiculous numbers over the course of a season? Point is, whatever you think about losing C.J. Stroud, yeah, that sucks. He was great. It's hard to doubt Ohio State's ability to find high-level quarterbacks. So you got to assume Ohio State's going to have high-level quarterback play. McCarthy comes back at quarterback for Michigan. So your 2 main hurdles that you need to get over in the Big Ten and the Big Ten East in particular, they're most likely going to have pretty good quarterback play. Penn State's going to have to get that from Drew Allard. They can't have the up and down that they've had the last couple of years at the quarterback position. They've got to have elevated quarterback play. As far as their schedule goes, last year we saw 2 teams from the Big Ten East make it into the playoffs, Michigan and Ohio State. So, Big Ten joins the SEC as now the only 2 conferences to get 2 teams into a single 4-team playoff. Could it happen again in 2023? It could. I mean, I don't necessarily think Penn State's got to go 12-0 or win the Big Ten East and then the Big Ten to make the playoffs. I guess if they were to split with Michigan and Ohio State and the loss was maybe close and they finished at 11-1, we saw last year that the committee is willing to put a number 2 Big Ten East team into the playoffs. They did it with Ohio State. As far as their schedule and how it breaks down, I've got it pulled up here. I'm not going to go through it game by game, but as far as the non-con goes, they get West Virginia at home. West Virginia should be terrible again in 2023. I don't understand why they kept their coach unless they just can't afford to buy out. But West Virginia at home to start things off should be an easy win. They play Delaware after that. Again, another easy win. And then later in the season, they host UMass. Again, an easy win, and more on that game in a second. Their first conference game on the road at Illinois. Now, this is a sneaky good game here. Illinois had not just one of the best defenses in the Big Ten last year, but one of the best defenses in the country. right? Brett Bielema takes over there. They should have another a good ground game again this year, and you would expect that defense to be good again. And you have to travel there, first conference game of the season on the road at Illinois, September 16th. Now, I think Penn State is better than Illinois, should win that game. Kind of last year Penn State had to travel and play Purdue in week 1. So they actually had a conference game to start the season on the road at Purdue, a team that some people were high on entering the season last year, and they ended up winning the Big Ten West. Penn State goes on the road and gets a close win in week 1. Could be a similar thing here on the road at Illinois, not week 1, but first conference game, September 16th. You then host Iowa, so you get another. I hate to call any team from the Big Ten West tough, but again, you're playing two defenses here in back-to-back weeks that are two of the best defenses in the Big Ten, year in and year out. Drew Allar's got a couple of weeks, in my opinion, to kind of get his feet underneath him with the West Virginia and the Delaware game, but then on the road at Illinois and home against Iowa in back-to-back weeks. Again, I don't expect Illinois or Iowa to be great teams, but those defenses can challenge a young quarterback like Drew Allar. At Northwestern, nothing to that. Now, here you go here. Now, you get a bye week on October 7th, okay? You come out of your bye week, and that's when you host UMass. That's when the UMass game comes. So bye week, UMass, which is basically 2 bye weeks in a row before you go on the road to the Horseshoe to play Ohio State. I don't know if this is genius scheduling by Penn State or just sort of lucked into this, but you couldn't really ask for a better run-up to what some would consider to be your most difficult game of the season on the road at Ohio State. You do have to play Michigan later, but you get them at home. So your two toughest opponents, Ohio State and Michigan, at Ohio State, home against Michigan. So that at Ohio State game, probably the most difficult game on the schedule, at least at first glance here. You got to play them there. But bye week and then UMass the 2 weeks before that. Huge. If you got any players that are injured, hurt, limping around, banged up, whatever, that's basically 2 off weeks there for them to rest heading into the game on the road at Ohio State. Come out of that, Indiana, shouldn't be a problem. At Maryland, Maryland's not a bad team, and they're not a great team. I'm not even sure they're a good team. But they play good enough at times to compete with some of the better teams in the Big Ten. They played Michigan really tough for the first half, at least last year. We'll see how much they can improve this year if they can knock off any of the big boys in the Big Ten. But you do have to play them there. Then you come back home for that Michigan game. So clearly, the 2 most important games on the schedule here, on the road at Ohio State, and then home against Michigan. You finish things up with a home game against Rutgers and then on the road at Michigan State. Never an easy schedule when you're in the Big Ten East, especially the last few years now that Michigan has finally kind of gotten its act together after a couple of down years under Harbaugh. But you got Ohio State and Michigan sitting there in your same division. Never an easy job to win that thing. But it does feel like it's set up for Penn State to make a run this year. If you're looking for, people like to talk every offseason and even into the season. Who will be that one team that gets into the playoffs this year that it's their first time getting in? Well, if you talk about first-time playoff contenders, let's see. Georgia's made the playoffs multiple times. Michigan multiple times. LSU has made the playoffs. There you have Penn State, of course, who has not. Alabama made the playoffs multiple times, going on to number 6. You've got Ohio State. They've made the playoffs multiple times. Southern Cal, Florida State, neither one of them have made the playoffs. I think they both have potential to make it this year. I like Southern Cal's chances a little bit better than Florida State's, but two sort of, I would call them second-tier teams this year. Obviously, not on a level, at least we don't think right now, of a Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Bama type situation, but some potential. Oregon has made a playoff. Washington actually has made a playoff, and then you got Tennessee, who has not. Notre Dame has. Clemson has, where other two have not. So, of all the teams that have yet to make a playoff, Penn State, I believe, has one of the better chances of those teams of getting in 2023. Now, they've got a difficult road to hoe with Michigan and Ohio State both in the regular season. But like I mentioned at the top of the video, we have seen that the Big Ten East does not have to go. A Big Ten East team does not need to be undefeated to get in. In fact, they don't even need to win the division or the conference, right? Ohio State. So it's going to be an interesting season again. I think in the Big Ten, East, it really seems like Penn State. Forget playoff talk for a second. it really seems like Penn State needs to beat either Ohio State or Michigan to me. It really seems that way for James Franklin. I love James Franklin. I don't think he should be fired. If they go 10-2 again with losses to Michigan and Ohio State, I don't think James Franklin should be fired. But I will completely understand the frustration of the Penn State fans if they basically have a repeat of what seems like every season over the last 3 or 4 years, which is a pretty good team but can't beat Ohio State or Michigan. They had a bad year during COVID, and 2021 didn't go well either because quarterback got hurt after the. People forget that about 2021. Penn State was a top 10 team in 2021, undefeated. Their quarterback gets hurt, and they completely fell off the face of the earth. Lost like 5 of their last 7 games or something, but they were top 10 before that. So they've had some good teams, but they've had a hard time getting over the hump lately. Can they do it in 2023? Can Penn State become this year's TCU, or Cincinnati or Michigan last year? You know, the team that gets into the playoffs for the first time. Could it be Penn State in 2023? I think they've got a shot. I don't know that I would pick Penn State as a playoff team today, as one of the Final Four playoff teams today, but I do think they fall into that category of teams who's got a shot. A lot's going to come down to the arm of Drew Allar, though. Anyway, let me know what you think down below. Have a good morning.